Hey, I'm Rel from Loom Fabrics. It's really nice to be here and be able to do this presentation for you today. I am going to show you beginners or returning sewists how to make this fun tea towel with the trim. It's really cute. We are going to learn today how to sew a nice even hem. We're going to learn how to apply the trim nice and reasonably even on both the tassel trim as well. We talk about creative options, like on this particular selvage, I quite liked the idea of leaving that exposed. You don't have to, you can do whatever you like. We also are going to go through how to thread the machine in case you need a refresher, how to wind a bobbin, two different kinds of bobbin applications, like the drop-in bobbin, and underneath, if you need a refresher, there'll be a quick overview of that. We're going to look at cutting the rectangles and how to get it nice and square. We are going to use an ironing tool or a tape measure. I'm going to show you a couple of different ways how to do the hem. To do this project, this particular fabric, the stripe runs this way, so I bought 75 centimeters of fabric, but it's going to make 3 tea towels. If you didn't care which way the stripes went, you could buy half a meter of fabric. If it's a 150 wide, half a meter of fabric is really good because you can then make 2 tea towels side by side. And I bought, in this instance, it's probably about 1.20 meters of the blue trim and probably about 50 centimeters of the braid trim, the tassel trim, to get this particular project on. And I've used a couple of different colored threads within it. So you'll need a sewing machine, you'll need scissors, you'll need pins, a tape measure, and thread. So here I have 75 centimeters of fabric, which is 144 wide. So this is actually enough fabric to make 3 tea towels. I want the stripe to go long ways down my tea towel. If it didn't have a stripe, I could just buy 50 centimeters, and if it was 150 wide, I could make 2 tea towels this way. You might not see the stripe in the video, but this has got a really nice fine matchstick stripe. So I'm going to just actually fold my fabric into 3 equal, oh, that was pretty spot on. Because this has got the colored selvage, that will come into my hem and we won't really see it. So I'm going to make that part of the 3, and I'm just jiggling it around till it's pretty even. I'm going to shake it out. I'm going to flip it around like this, make sure it's even at this end as well. And because this fabric has a stripe in it, it's actually going to be pretty easy to cut it straight this way because I can just follow the stripe. So I'm going to grab a pin here and here. Oh, that's a giant pin. It's actually probably a hat pin. And then I'm going to open it up and I'm just going to run my fingernail along that exact stripe, and it's 1 stripe over, so that's fine. I'm going to just cut from this end exactly on that stripe. If your fabric wasn't striped, you could press this crease in and just cut along the crease, or you could use a ruler and a rotary cutter if that was what you like to use. I'm keeping my fabric flat on the table and my scissors flat. I don't want to cut over the pin, and I'm going to do the same thing over here. So here's my piece of fabric. I just want to tidy up this end. I'm just going to lay the ruler over the end, and I'm following the grain lines of the fabric as best I can to sort of square it off. I'm just going to draw a chalk line so I've got something to follow. I'm just going to trim that so it's a nice straight and square edge. It's going to make it much easier to hem that edge. And I'm going to do that at the other end as well. So now I've got a really nice even rectangle. If you had a rotary cutter and a cutting board, you could do this very easily by lining the fabric up on the grid on the cutting board. What I'm going to do now is take this to the ironing board, and I'm going to iron over 1 centimeter using this hot ironing ruler. Press over here once, and then I'm going to take that folded edge and press it over again. So I'm going to have 2 rolls like that. So here's my tea towel fabric, all nice and pressed, the hem's pressed in. Don't worry in the corners if it's poking out like this. I will show you a trick when we get up to stitching it. I'm just looking at my sort of design idea right now, and I'm showing you on the wrong side. I'm going to show you on the right side, because I'm just going to map out what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to take this bubble ribbon. I'm calling it bubble ribbon. It's really a spot ribbon. And I'm going to pop 1 row of it at this end, roughly that close to the edge, and 1 row here. I'm going to leave this selvage showing just for fun. I like the idea of it being a bit more rustic and handcrafted and unique. I think that's fun, rather than all uniform like it's being bought in a shop. And I'm going to put this fun tassel bright coloured trim just on one end like that, and then on the underside I'm going to put, it'll have to be in this corner, I'm going to put a little piece of braid here under these edges to act as a hook, so that you could hang this tea towel if you wanted to. And if you do hang it, I want this to be really visible, so that's why I'm putting the loop at this end and the trim at this end. So what I'm going to do first is sew just the short edge here. So I want to just make sure that is pinned into place. I'm going to stitch, disregarding this fold, I'm just going to stitch along this hem edge, and the same at this end, just along there. And I'm going to tuck in this loop at this point. So I've just put it into place like that and pinned it. We're just going to do a recap on threading your machine. If you haven't threaded your machine for a long time, this is how you're going to do it. So you get your roll of thread. If you've got a machine that has one of these, this would be how you would put your roll of thread. If you have one that has an upright, obviously you're going to put it there. This machine has both, but I usually use this location here. You're going to bring your thread across, and on most machines there will be some kind of hook at the back here to put it through. You're going to bring it through to the front, and they will usually all have instructions, but they all are a little bit different. Then you're going to bring your thread through to the front. You're going to hook it down underneath some kind of thing that looks like this, and there's a loop here. I'm just going to shovel the camera over so you can see it. This loop here, we need to make sure that it gets caught in there. Usually you can just pull it through like I've done there. Sometimes you'll have to actually thread it through on some older vintage machines. Then you're going to bring your thread down. There will be some kind of loop at this point above the needle. Some machines are going to have a needle threader. This one does. So I hook my thread like so, and it will thread through. They are a bit tricky to get used to. If you don't have a needle threader, you can cut the edge of your thread, really nice and clean cut. I usually lick the end. It's gross, but it does the job. And then you can put it through the needle. Now, I've been very practiced at this. I've done it a lot of times. It's probably a good idea to have the machine turned on with the light on. That will make it a bit easier to see the hole. That's the top of my machine threaded. Now I'm going to thread the bobbin. So on this machine, I can pull out the bobbin case, like take out the old bobbin. I'm going to put in the new bobbin. It's going clockwise. It's going to pull through this little slot here and then up and out of this gap here. And it's going to be pulling against itself. When you're pulling, if it's going all the same way, you know I've got it wrong. So I can see that it's got a bit of tension on it. Then I'm going to turn it back over, hold this little lever out. This little prong goes to the top. I'm going to pop it back in. You'll hear it click usually. Then I'm going to hold the top thread and wind the wheel forward for one stitch so that both threads come through together. Then I recommend you do a little practice sew and just make sure it's sewing nice and neatly. If you've got problems with your stitch on the top, that means your bobbin is threaded incorrectly. If you have problems with the stitch on the bottom, it means your top thread is not threaded correctly. So you just have to go through and check that you've threaded as you should have. So I'm just going to show you on this different machine how to thread it and reel a bobbin. So this particular machine, this little wool holder goes up and down. This is a machine that I use to take places because it's really lightweight. It's got a handle at the back. So I always keep it down when I'm moving it so it doesn't get damaged. And in this particular instance, on the top of the machine, there's an instruction which says to run through this tensioner at the top for the bobbin. And here's my bobbin, and it will sit on this little poly thing here. And it also shows me which way to run the fabric through. Now these machines talk about, in this tiny little hole just here, they talk about threading the fabric, the thread through the hole, but I never do that. I just pop that on. I wrap it around a few times. I hold the end of the thread if I've left enough, just to get it going. Push that over, put my foot down, and see, I just realized it's not rolling, so I just roll it around a bit more, and there we go, it's just going. So I haven't had to thread it through the little tiny hole. And if we're just doing a little bit of sewing, you don't have to fill the whole bobbin, like that's probably enough. And then I'm just going to snip the thread, and that's my bobbin. Now to use this bobbin, I'm going to do a close-up on how to put it into the bobbin case, because this is a drop-in bobbin. So this machine is great. It's got the little sticker here as well. It shows you exactly how to do it. You might need to look at your instruction manual if you're having any problems. This has a little lever just to pop it out. As well as that sticker, it's also got this picture here. So I need to make sure that my thread is going this way and pulling. You can follow it from that picture. So I simply drop it in. There's a little hook here that it has to hook underneath and pull through. That's all I've got to do on these ones. It's really easy. Put the little cover back in. I'm going to thread the top thread now. I'll show you how to do it. So to thread the top thread on this machine, I don't need to use this tensioner. That's for the bobbin. And this machine's got some pretty cool pictures on the top to show me. It's really easy. But all I've got to do is loop through this little area here. And mine's got numbers on it, 1, 2, 3, loop it under. It's got a hook in here. I just need to make sure it's caught in there. So it goes down, around, up and back down. And then there'll be, again, a little sort of loop underneath to catch that thread. This machine doesn't have a needle threader. So I just give it a little lick on the end to cut it really nice and clean and sharp. And then I've got the light on so it's easy to see. That needle is really low, so it's a bit hard to, so I'm just going to turn the hand wheel to get it up where I want it, and I'm going to pull it through. Now I'm going to hold that thread. I'm just going to wind it once, and I can see now it's picking it up and pulled through. So I now have 2 threads. So that's my machine threaded. I'm now going to lift that foot and pull these through and do a quick practice to make sure I've threaded it properly. Now I'm just going to take a piece of scrap fabric and I'm just going to check that my stitching is nice and even and I've threaded the machine properly. And everything's looking perfect, front and back. So if there was a problem with the stitching underneath, that would mean that the top is not threaded properly. And if there was a problem with the stitching on the top, that would mean that the bottom is not threaded properly. So I've sewn my 2 end seams, which is great. I've sewn my loop in on one side. What I'm going to do next is sew this trim in place, because now I've finished this seam, I can make it really level with the edge of the fabric. And I've got another piece here I'm going to stitch on. So I'm just going to chop that. This bubble, cute little spotty blue trim. So on my, I'm going to measure in inches today because it's probably easier for you to see than centimeters, and I'm going to say 2 inches from the edge, and we're going to actually stitch this over the folded edge here. I like to put my pins across because that way, if I do not pull it out in time and sew over it, there's a lot smaller chance of breaking a needle or getting a pin caught in your sewing machine. And what I'm doing is measuring along the length and pinning my trim into place so that it's going to be the same distance the whole way. Now, when I get to the end here, I'm actually going to, because I've got this raw edge here, I'm just going to fold this ribbon under about here, a little bit less. I don't know if you can see that, but I'm folding it closed. It's a little bit shy of my 2 inches. So I'm not impacting this really fun fray edge. And I'm just going to poke that little corner in with my pin and pin that into place. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this edge here. Okay, I'm just folding the edge under. So, and I'm going to make it 2 inches from the edge here. So I'm using my tape measure. I'm going to take my pin and poke that edge under and then pin across in place exactly where I want it to sit. And then I'm going to work my way down. That's perfectly 2 inches. My pins are rolling away. I've flicked my little loop out there so I don't catch it in the wrong spot. And I'm just making sure all the way down that my braid is exactly in the right spot. And we're going to sew it right down over the folded edge here like that. And then I'm just going to leave this, and when I finished I'll cut it off. Now I'm going to take it to the machine. So here's my tea towel with the 2 rows of trim. There's my loop, and now I'm going to apply this trim here on the finished edge. Now, because this is a raw edge, I'm just going to fold that under and pin it in place. I don't know if you can see that a bit better. So I've just folded that edge under so it's not raw. And then I'm going to, this has got a little bit of give in it. So what that means is if I pin it like this, it might all push as I sew, the top will bunch up like this. So I do need to put a little bit of tension on the trim as I sew it in. It does mean when I wash this, it's probably going to bunch up a little bit on the bottom, but I actually think that'll be really cute anyway. So I'm not at all worried about that. And I've put this, remember, on the opposite end. So when this loop is done and it's hanging, you'll see that trim really nicely. It'll be nice and exposed. And then I'm just going to sew it off to the edge on this edge because that's going to get folded in with the hem and you won't see it. And I'm going to use the same blue thread because I think it's a bit fun to use that blue thread, and I'm going to stitch it on both edges flat and pin it in place. I don't know if you can see that a bit better. So I've just folded that edge under so it's not raw. And then I'm going to, this has got a little bit of give in it. So what that means is if I pin it like this, it might all push as I sew, the top will bunch up like this. So I do need to put a little bit of tension on the trim as I sew it in. It does mean when I wash this, it's probably going to bunch up a little bit on the bottom, but I actually think that'll be really cute anyway. So I'm not at all worried about that. And I've put this, remember, on the opposite end, so when this loop is done and it's hanging, you'll see that trim really nicely. It'll be nice and exposed. And then I'm just going to sew it off to the edge on this edge, because that's going to get folded in with the hem and you won't see it. And I'm going to use the same blue thread because I think it's a bit fun to use that blue thread, and I'm going to stitch it on both edges flat. So my tassels are on, the trim is really super cute. I don't mind that it curls up a little bit. I think it gives it all a bit more sort of interest and body and creative, like, craziness. I'm going to just trim this extra bit off. There's only really one more thing to do, and that is to stitch this loop into place here. So I'm going to pin that right where it wants to sit flat, which is really nice. I'm going to pin this corner, and I'm going to make sure with my giant pin that all the ends are tucked in nicely. What you could do if you wanted to was fold that down in the corner like a mitre. Hopefully you can see that. And then pin it again. Now this is going to, I can see that pressed edge is slightly stretched out, so I'm going to put quite a few pins because I don't want it to, and I'm going to show you how to sew that and keep it not stretched out so you end up with a big buckle or pucker in it. So every now and then I'm putting a pin in place really nice and straight and letting these little gaps, like I'm putting a lot more pins than I normally would. Now this end's going to be a bit chunky, so we want to actually finish on this end. If we tried to start from here, it's going to be really hard to get that going under the machine, but because we're going to stitch it this way, you'll find it a bit easier. I'm just going to trim this excess off as well. Pin this closed. Pin this bit closed. Might as well put one more in here. Awesome. So there's my little cute tea towel. I really love it. It's really fun. And I can hang it by its loop. I actually want to go and clean the kitchen now. Have some fun with it. Isn't it fun? Now this would equally be a really fun trim on the bottom of a skirt or on the side of a cushion. It's definitely festive and party. It's really fun.